I was staring at my phone in disbelief when my daughter Emma called me at work, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and tears, telling me that her car had been towed from the visitor parking spot at our community in Scottsdale, Arizona. And now she was stranded with no way to get to her college orientation meeting that afternoon. "Dad, I don't understand," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I parked exactly where you told me to park, the visitor spot right near your house. I had the visitor pass on the dashboard. Everything was by the book." I felt my jaw tighten. My name is Stephen Garrison, and I had lived in the Saguaro Hills community for 8 years without any major issues with the homeowners association. Sure, they were strict about lawn maintenance and house colors, but nothing that ever really affected my daily life. I worked as a software engineer for a tech company downtown, and my daughter Emma was preparing to start her freshman year at Arizona State University in just 2 months. She had been staying with me for the summer, commuting back and forth between my house and her mother's place in Tempe. "Stay right there," I told her, already grabbing my keys from my desk. "I'm coming to get you. We'll figure this out." My supervisor gave me a questioning look as I rushed past his office, but I just waved and said it was a family emergency. The drive from downtown Scottsdale back to my neighborhood normally took about 20 minutes, but I made it in 15, my mind racing the entire way. Emma had parked in that visitor spot dozens of times over the summer. I had specifically gotten a visitor parking pass from the HOA office when she started staying with me regularly. The pass was supposed to be good for 6 months. When I pulled up to my house, Emma was sitting on my front steps, her face red from crying. She was 20 years old, about to start college, and had worked 2 jobs throughout high school to save money for tuition. She had gotten a partial scholarship, but we still needed to come up with about $15,000 for her first year. Seeing her so upset made my protective instincts kick into high gear. "Where did they tow it to?" I asked, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. "Some place called Desert Impound on McDowell Road," she said, showing me a card that had been left tucked into my front door. "Dad, the fees are already $250, and it's only been 3 hours. They said it goes up $50 every day." I felt my blood pressure rising. $250 for an illegal tow from a spot she was authorized to park in. This was absolutely ridiculous. I pulled out my phone and dialed the HOA office number that I had saved in my contacts. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. "Saguaro Hills HOA, this is Brenda speaking." "Brenda, this is Stephen Garrison from 4582 Desert Willow Court. My daughter's car was just towed from visitor parking, and she had a valid visitor pass displayed. I need to know what happened and why." There was a pause, and I heard typing on a keyboard. "Mr. Garrison, let me pull up your account. Can you give me the license plate number of the vehicle?" I asked Emma, and she rattled it off. I repeated it to Brenda. More typing. Then Brenda said, "Yes, I see here that vehicle was towed at the direction of our HOA president, Patricia Whitmore. The note says the vehicle was in violation of extended visitor parking rules." "Extended visitor parking rules," I repeated, confused. "What are you talking about? The pass I got was supposed to be valid for 6 months. We're only 2 months in." "Let me transfer you to Patricia," Brenda said quickly. "She handles all enforcement issues directly." Before I could protest, I was put on hold, listening to some generic elevator music. Emma looked at me with worried eyes, and I tried to give her a reassuring smile even though I was fuming inside. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes, a sharp voice came on the line. "This is Patricia Whitmore, HOA president. Who am I speaking with?" "Stephen Garrison. My daughter's car was just towed from visitor parking and I want to know why." "Mr. Garrison, Patricia said, her tone dripping with condescension. I personally observed that vehicle in visitor parking for more than 72 consecutive hours. According to our CC and Artiques, visitor parking is limited to 72 hours maximum. After that, it's considered residential parking, which requires a resident sticker. I could feel my face getting hot. That's not what I was told when I got the visitor pass. I was told it was good for 6 months. The pass itself is valid for 6 months, Patricia said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. But individual parking sessions cannot exceed 72 hours. Your daughter's vehicle needed to be moved and then could return. She was in violation. That's insane, I said. Nobody told me about any 72-hour rule. And even if that rule exists, shouldn't you have given us a warning first? Instead of going straight to towing. The rules are clearly outlined in the community guidelines that you received when you purchased your home, Patricia said. Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse. The vehicle was towed according to our policies, and if you want it back, you'll need to pay the impound fees. I want to see this rule in writing, I demanded, and I want to know why there was no warning. Mr. Garrison, I don't have time to argue with every resident who doesn't follow the rules. The decision is final. Good day. And she hung up on me. I stared at my phone in disbelief. She had actually hung up on me. Emma was watching my face, and I could see she was trying not to cry again. What did she say? Emma asked quietly. I told her about the 72-hour rule, and her eyes widened. Dad, I've been parking there for weeks. Why didn't they say something before? Why would they just tow my car without any warning? I don't know, sweetheart, I said, already pulling up the contact information for the impound lot. But we're going to get your car back, and then we're going to fight this. We drove to Desert Impound, a grim-looking lot surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with barbed wire. The office was a small trailer that looked like it had seen better days. Inside, a bored-looking man with a cigarette dangling from his lips barely glanced up when we walked in. Help you, he muttered. My daughter's car was towed from Saguaro Hills, I said. We need to get it back. He pulled out a clipboard and scanned down a list. License plate. Emma gave it to him again. He nodded and punched some numbers into an ancient calculator. $250 for the tow, plus $75 for processing, plus $30 for the gate fee. That's $355, cash or card. This is robbery, I said. The tow was illegal. She had permission to park there. The man shrugged. Take it up with whoever called us. I just store them. You want the car or not? I wanted to argue more, but Emma had her orientation meeting in less than 2 hours, and she needed her car. I gritted my teeth and handed over my credit card. $355 that we hadn't budgeted for, money that was supposed to go toward Emma's textbooks. After signing what felt like a dozen forms, they finally released Emma's car. It had a small scratch on the bumper that definitely hadn't been there before, but the impound guy claimed it was pre-existing and refused to take responsibility. Emma drove her car and I followed her back to my house, my mind already working through what I needed to do next. Once we were back home, I sent Emma off to her orientation meeting, promising her that I would handle this. Then I went into my home office and started digging through the massive folder of paperwork I had received when I bought the house 8 years ago. It took me almost an hour to find the CC and Artiques, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that governed our community. The document was 73 pages long, in tiny print, written in dense legal language that was clearly designed to be as impenetrable as possible. I made myself a pot of coffee and started reading. It took me 2 hours to get through the entire thing, and I read the parking section 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. There was indeed a mention of visitor parking being limited to 72 consecutive hours. But there were two very important details that Patricia Whitmore had conveniently left out. First, the CC and Articus stated that any violation must be documented with written notice to the homeowner, giving them 48 hours to correct the violation before any enforcement action could be taken. Emma's car had been towed with zero warning. Second, the section on visitor parking stated that homeowners could request an extended visitor parking permit for family members staying for longer periods, valid for up to 6 months. This was exactly what I thought I had requested when I went to the HOA office. But looking at the actual permit they had given me, it just said Visitor Parking Pass with an expiration date. There was no mention of the 72-hour limitation. I took photos of the relevant pages with my phone and then searched my email for any correspondence with the HOA. I found the email I had sent 2 months ago, requesting a visitor parking arrangement for my daughter who would be staying with me for the summer. I had specifically mentioned that she would be parking in the visitor spot regularly. The response from Brenda at the HOA office had simply said, "Come by the office to pick up your visitor pass." No mention of any limitations. Armed with this information, I called the HOA office again the next morning. Brenda answered again, and I asked to speak with Patricia Whitmore. "She's not available right now," Brenda said. "Can I take a message?" "Yes," I said. "Tell her that Stephen Garrison called regarding the illegal towing of my daughter's vehicle, and that I have documentation showing the HOA violated its own procedures. I want a full refund of the impound fees, compensation for the damage to the vehicle, and a formal apology. If I don't hear back from her by end of business today, I'll be contacting an attorney." Brenda's voice got a little nervous. "I'll pass along the message, Mr. Garrison. I didn't hear anything that day, or the next day. On the third day, I received a letter in the mail from the HOA. It was from Patricia Whitmore, and it was breathtakingly dismissive. 'Dear Mr. Garrison,' it read, 'your complaint regarding the towing of an unauthorized vehicle has been reviewed and denied. The vehicle in question was in violation of community parking rules, and the towing was conducted in accordance with HOA policies. No refund will be issued. Future violations may result in fines in addition to towing. Sincerely, Patricia Whitmore, HOA President.'" I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling my anger grow. The complete dismissal of my concerns, the refusal to even acknowledge that they might have made a mistake, the implicit threat of future fines. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about principle. I had never sued anyone in my life. I had always believed in trying to resolve conflicts through communication and compromise. But Patricia Whitmore had made it clear that she had no interest in either. So I started researching attorneys in the Scottsdale area who handled HOA disputes. I found a law firm called Martinez and Chen, which specialized in homeowner disputes. The reviews were good, and their website mentioned they worked on contingency for certain cases. I called and made an appointment for the following week. Emma was back at her mother's house in Temp when I went to the law office. The attorney who met with me was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s named Rebecca Chen. She listened carefully as I explained the situation, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Mr. Garrison, I think you have a very strong case. The HOA violated their own enforcement procedures by not providing written notice before towing. They also failed to properly inform you about the parking limitations when you requested the visitor pass, and the fact that they're refusing to even discuss a refund shows bad faith." "So you'll take the case?" I asked. "I will," she said. But I want to be upfront with you about costs and potential outcomes. These cases can take time. We might be looking at 6 months to a year before we see a resolution. HOAs often drag their feet, hoping homeowners will give up. And while I think we can win, we need to document everything carefully. What kind of damages could we potentially recover? I asked. Rebecca tapped her pen on her notepad. At minimum, you should be able to recover the impound fees and the cost of repairing the damage to your daughter's vehicle. Beyond that, we could argue for punitive damages based on the HOA's bad faith actions and violation of their own procedures. We could also potentially recover your attorney fees if we can show the HOA acted unreasonably, but I can't guarantee any specific amount. I want to move forward, I said. This isn't right, and if we don't stand up to them, they'll just keep doing this to other people. Rebecca smiled. Good. I'll need you to gather all your documentation. The emails, the parking pass, photos of your daughter's car, receipts from the impound lot, copies of the CC and Articus with the relevant sections highlighted, everything. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case. Over the next 2 weeks, I compiled everything Rebecca had requested. I also reached out to some of my neighbors to see if anyone else had experienced similar issues with Patricia Whitmore and the HOA. What I discovered was disturbing. My next-door neighbor, Mike Thompson, told me that he had been fined $500 last year for painting his front door a shade of beige that Patricia deemed non-compliant, even though it was clearly within the approved color palette listed in the community guidelines. Another neighbor, Susan Martinez, had been threatened with daily fines because her son's basketball hoop was visible from the street, even though the CC and Articus made no mention of basketball hoops being prohibited. Both of them had eventually paid or complied rather than fight because they couldn't afford legal fees. I shared this information with Rebecca, and she said it could be useful to establish a pattern of behavior. She drafted and filed a complaint in Maricopa County Superior Court, naming both the Saguaro Hills HOA and Patricia Whitmore, personally, as defendants. The complaint alleged breach of contract, violation of the HOA's own governing documents, and conversion of property. The HOA had 30 days to respond. During that time, I continued gathering evidence. I went back through my neighborhood, this time with a camera, documenting other cars that had been parked in visitor spots for what appeared to be extended periods. I found at least 4 vehicles with visitor passes that had been there for several days, none of which had been towed. I took photos with timestamps. When Emma came back to visit one weekend, I showed her what I had been working on. She looked at all the documentation spread across my dining room table and shook her head. "Dad, I appreciate everything you're doing," she said, "but I'm worried about you. This is taking up so much of your time, and what if we lose? You'll be out even more money for attorney fees." "Rebecca is working on contingency," I reminded her. "And even if we lose, this is important. What they did was wrong, Emma. They can't just bully people because they have a little bit of power." She hugged me. "I know. I just don't want you to be stressed out about this." "I'm more stressed about getting you through college," I said honestly, "but we'll manage that too." The HOA's response to our lawsuit arrived about 2 weeks later. Rebecca called me to discuss it. "They've hired a law firm out of Phoenix," she said. "Thompson and Associates. They're known for defending HOAs aggressively. Their response basically denies everything and argues that the HOA was within its rights." "What's our next step?" I asked. "Discovery," Rebecca said. "We're going to request all their records related to parking enforcement for the past 2 years, all communications about your daughter's vehicle, meeting minutes from HOA board meetings, everything. If there's any evidence of selective enforcement or procedural violations, we'll find it. The discovery process was like pulling teeth. The HOA's attorneys dragged their feet on every request, filing objections and demanding that we narrow our requests. Rebecca had to file a motion to compel, which meant another court hearing. I took time off work to attend, sitting in the courtroom and watching Rebecca argue eloquently about why we needed access to the HOA's records. The judge, a stern-looking man named Judge Franklin Morrison, seemed unimpressed with the HOA's objections. "Counselor," he said to the HOA's attorney, "if your client has nothing to hide, I don't see why you're fighting so hard against reasonable discovery requests. I'm granting the motion to compel. Your client has 20 days to produce the requested documents." That was a victory, but it was just a small step. When the documents finally arrived, they came in a massive box of poorly organized papers. Rebecca and I spent an entire Saturday going through everything in her office, sorting and cataloging. What we found was illuminating. The HOA's parking enforcement records showed that over the past 2 years, 47 vehicles had been towed from the community. Of those, 32 had been towed without any prior written warning, in direct violation of the HOA's own procedures. More importantly, we found emails between Patricia Whitmore and the towing company, Desert Impound, that suggested a financial arrangement that made my stomach turn. The emails were carefully worded, but the implication was clear. Desert Impound was paying the HOA a referral fee of $50 for every vehicle towed. Patricia Whitmore had been authorizing tows not to enforce legitimate parking rules, but to generate revenue for the HOA and possibly for herself. "This is gold," Rebecca said, reading through the emails. "This completely changes the case. We're not just talking about a procedural violation anymore. We're talking about potential fraud." "Can we add that to the lawsuit?" I asked. "We'll file an amended complaint," Rebecca said. "And I think we should also send this information to the Arizona Attorney General's office. If Patricia Whitmore has been personally profiting from these tows, that could be criminal." I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with disgust. This woman had been abusing her position to make money off the homeowners she was supposed to be serving. How many people had paid impound fees thinking they had no choice, never knowing they were victims of a scam? Rebecca filed the amended complaint, which now included allegations of fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. She also sent a referral to the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Within a week, I got a call from an investigator named David Walsh, who wanted to interview me about my experience with the HOA. I met with David at a coffee shop in downtown Scottsdale. He was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I walked him through everything that had happened, showing him the documentation I had compiled. He took careful notes and asked probing questions. "Mr. Garrison," he said when I finished, "based on what you're telling me and the documents you've provided, I think there's enough here to open a formal investigation. We've actually received complaints about this HOA before, but we didn't have enough evidence to move forward. What you've uncovered could be the missing piece. What happens now?" I asked. "We'll subpoena records from both the HOA and the impound company," David said. "We'll interview board members and look at financial records. If we find evidence of kickbacks or self-dealing, we can bring charges. This could take a few months, but I'll keep you updated." Meanwhile, our civil lawsuit was moving forward. Rebecca had deposed several HOA board members, and their testimony had been revealing. It turned out that Patricia Whitmore had not been sharing information about the towing arrangements with the rest of the board. Several board members expressed shock when Rebecca showed them the emails about referral fees. One board member, a retired accountant named Harold Green, was particularly upset. "If Patricia has been receiving money from the towing company, that's completely inappropriate," he said during his deposition. "She never disclosed any of this to the board. We thought the towing was just standard enforcement." We also deposed Patricia Whitmore herself. Rebecca scheduled it for a Wednesday morning at her office. I was allowed to be present, sitting quietly in the corner while Rebecca asked questions. Patricia showed up in an expensive-looking suit, accompanied by her attorney. She was probably in her mid-50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expression that looked like she was perpetually smelling something unpleasant. She answered Rebecca's initial questions with curt, dismissive responses. But as Rebecca started asking about the financial arrangements with Desert Impound, I saw Patricia's composure begin to crack. Her answers became evasive. She claimed she didn't remember specific conversations. She said the referral fees were legitimate administrative costs. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rebecca said, her voice calm but firm, "let me show you an email you sent to the owner of Desert Impound." She slid a printed copy across the table. "In this email, you suggest that you could increase the volume of tows if the referral fee was raised to $75 per vehicle. Can you explain what you meant by that?" Patricia's face went red. "I was negotiating on behalf of the HOA," she said. "We needed revenue for community improvements. But this revenue isn't recorded in any of the HOA's financial statements," Rebecca pointed out. "Where did this money go?" Patricia's attorney jumped in. "My client isn't going to answer questions that could potentially incriminate her." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "So you're invoking her Fifth Amendment rights?" The attorney and Patricia had a whispered conversation. Then the attorney said, "At this time, yes." Rebecca smiled slightly. "Let the record show that the witness is refusing to answer on Fifth Amendment grounds." She turned to Patricia. "Mrs. Whitmore, did you personally receive any money from Desert Impound?" Another whispered conversation. Then the attorney said, "My client invokes her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." This went on for another 20 minutes, with Patricia refusing to answer any questions about the financial arrangements. Rebecca carefully documented each refusal. When the deposition ended, Patricia practically fled from the office. After she left, Rebecca turned to me with a satisfied expression. "That went even better than I hoped. When someone invokes the Fifth Amendment in a civil case, the jury can draw a negative inference. Essentially, they can assume she's refusing to answer because the truth would hurt her case." "So what happens next?" I asked. "We're going to push for a trial date," Rebecca said. "But honestly, I think there's a good chance they'll want to settle now. Their case just got a lot weaker." She was right. 2 weeks later, the HOA's attorneys reached out to discuss settlement. The initial offer was insulting. Just $2,000 to make the case go away. Rebecca rejected it immediately and countered with a demand for $50,000, which would cover the impound fees, damages to Emma's car, my attorney fees, compensation for my time and stress, and punitive damages for the HOA's bad faith conduct. The HOA came back with $5,000. Rebecca countered with $45,000. They offered $10,000. This dance went on for another month with offers and counteroffers going back and forth. I was getting frustrated with the process, but Rebecca counseled patience. "They're testing how serious we are," she said. "Every time they increase their offer, it shows they know they're in trouble. Just trust the process." Meanwhile, David Walsh from the Attorney General's office called with an update. "Mr. Garrison, I wanted to let you know that we've completed our investigation." We found evidence that Patricia Whitmore received approximately $18,000 in kickbacks from the impound company over a 2-year period. We're moving forward with criminal charges for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. I felt a rush of vindication. When will charges be filed? Within the next 2 weeks, David said. I wanted to give you a heads up because it will likely be in the news and it might impact your civil case. When news broke that Patricia Whitmore was being charged with fraud, it created a firestorm in our community. The local news stations ran stories about the HOA president who had been scamming homeowners. My phone rang constantly with neighbors calling to thank me for exposing what had been happening. Several people mentioned they had suspected something was wrong but hadn't known how to prove it. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia Whitmore from her position as president. They also voted to immediately terminate their relationship with Desert Impound and to review all towing records from the past 2 years to identify other potential victims. The publicity around the criminal charges put enormous pressure on the HOA's insurance company, which was defending the civil lawsuit. Their attorneys called Rebecca with a new settlement offer, $28,000. Rebecca called me to discuss it. This is a substantial offer, she said. After my fees, which would be about a third, you'd be looking at roughly $18,000 to $19,000. That's enough to cover Emma's first year of tuition with some left over. I thought about it carefully. We could keep fighting and potentially get more at trial, but there was also the risk that a jury might award less, and the trial was still months away. Emma's tuition payment was due in 6 weeks. Let's accept it, I said. This was never about getting rich. It was about holding them accountable. And with the criminal charges, Patricia is facing real consequences. Rebecca negotiated a few final terms, including a provision that the HOA would send written apologies to all homeowners who had been towed without proper notice and would refund their impound fees if they requested it. The HOA also agreed to implement new procedures requiring board approval before any vehicle could be towed, and to prohibit any financial arrangements with towing companies beyond standard service fees. The settlement agreement was finalized in mid-July, just 3 weeks before Emma was supposed to start classes at Arizona State. When the check arrived, I took Emma out to dinner to tell her the news. We went to her favorite restaurant, a little Italian place in Tempe near her mother's house. After we ordered, I pulled out my phone and showed her the mobile deposit I had made that afternoon. Emma, I said, we won the lawsuit. After attorney fees, we got just over $19,000. Her eyes went wide. Dad, are you serious? Dead serious, I said. It's enough to cover your entire first-year tuition, plus some of your textbooks. She started crying right there in the restaurant, tears streaming down her face. I can't believe it, she said. I've been so stressed about how we were going to pay for everything. I was looking at taking out more loans, maybe working extra hours. You don't have to worry about that now, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. You can focus on your studies. That's what's important. Dad, thank you, she said. Not just for the money, but for fighting. You could have just paid the impound fees and let it go, but you stood up for what was right. You're my daughter, I said simply. I'll always fight for you. We had a wonderful dinner, talking about her plans for college, her roommate assignment, her class schedule. For the first time in months, I saw her looking genuinely excited and happy, not stressed and worried. A few weeks later, Patricia Whitmore's criminal trial began. I attended several days of testimony, watching as prosecutors laid out the evidence of her fraud scheme. The owner of Desert Impound had been offered immunity in exchange for his testimony, and he provided detailed records of the payments he had made to Patricia. She had set up a shell LLC to receive the money, trying to hide it from the HOA and from tax authorities. The trial lasted 5 days. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Patricia was sentenced to 2 years in prison, 5 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution of approximately $75,000 to the HOA and affected homeowners. I was in the courtroom when the sentence was read. Patricia's face was pale, her earlier arrogance completely gone. She looked like a woman who had finally realized the consequences of her actions. As they led her away, I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, just a sense of relief that justice had been served. The new HOA board, led by Harold Green as interim president, reached out to me personally. Harold came by my house one evening to apologize. "Mr. Garrison," he said, standing on my front porch looking genuinely remorseful, "I want to apologize on behalf of the entire board. We failed in our oversight duties. We should have been more aware of what Patricia was doing. What happened to your daughter should never have occurred." "I appreciate that, Harold," I said. "I hope the board will implement better checks and balances going forward." "We already have," he said. "We've brought in an independent management company to handle day-to-day operations. We've revised our enforcement procedures to require multiple board members to sign off on any towing. And we've scheduled a town hall meeting for next month to hear concerns from homeowners and discuss how we can rebuild trust." Over the following months, things in the community slowly improved. The new management company was professional and responsive. Enforcement actions became more reasonable and were always preceded by written warnings. The neighborhood felt less like a police state and more like a community again. Emma thrived in her first semester at Arizona State. She called me regularly with updates about her classes, her new friends, the club she had joined. Not having to worry about money allowed her to fully engage with the college experience. She even made the dean's list her first semester, something she was incredibly proud of. In December, during her winter break, she came over to my house for dinner. We sat in my living room after eating, and she pulled out her laptop to show me her schedule for the spring semester. "Dad, I've been thinking," she said. "I want to study law, maybe become a lawyer like Rebecca Chen." What you and she did, fighting against the HOA and winning, it showed me how important it is to have people who will stand up for what's right. I felt a swell of pride. "I think you'd make an excellent lawyer," I said. "You've always been good at arguing your case." I said that with a smile and she laughed. "I learned from the best," she said, giving me a hug. "Seriously though, thank you for everything. I know this whole situation was stressful, but I'm glad you fought. You taught me that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when it's hard." "That's a lesson your grandpa taught me," I said. "He always said that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. I couldn't just let Patricia Whitmore get away with scamming people." Emma nodded. "How many other homeowners ended up getting refunds?" 43, I said. The HOA sent letters to everyone who had been towed over the past 2 years, and 43 of them requested and received refunds. Total of about $15,000 returned to homeowners. "That's amazing," Emma said. "You didn't just help us. You helped dozens of families." I hadn't really thought about it that way, but she was right. What had started as a frustrating situation with my daughter's car had ended up exposing a corrupt system and bringing justice for many people. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail from one of my neighbors, an elderly woman named Dorothy Sanders who lived 3 streets over. She wrote to thank me for exposing Patricia's scheme. Her grandson had been living with her temporarily while he got back on his feet after a divorce, and his car had been towed twice. costing her over $600 in fees. She had struggled to pay for it on her fixed income. The HOA had refunded her money as part of the settlement, and she wanted me to know what a difference it had made for her. Reading her letter, I felt emotional. This was why the fight had been worth it. It wasn't about the money for me, though getting Emma's tuition covered was obviously wonderful. It was about standing up to people who abuse their power and think they can get away with it. The following spring, Harold Green and the HOA board invited me to attend a community appreciation dinner. They wanted to publicly recognize my role in exposing the fraud and helping to reform the HOA. I was reluctant at first, not comfortable being in the spotlight, but Emma convinced me to go. The dinner was held at a local community center. About 200 homeowners attended. Harold gave a speech about the changes the board had implemented and the lessons learned from the scandal. Then he called me up to the front. "Stephen Garrison is the kind of neighbor and community member we should all aspire to be," Harold said. When he saw an injustice, he didn't just complain. He took action. He gathered evidence, hired an attorney, and fought for what was right. Because of his courage and persistence, we exposed a fraud scheme, reformed our HOA procedures, and made our community better. Please join me in thanking Steve. The room erupted in applause. I felt my face getting red as I stood there, but I also felt proud that I had made a difference. Proud that I had shown Emma the importance of standing up for yourself and others. I said a few brief words, thanking Rebecca Chen for her excellent legal work, thanking David Walsh and the Attorney General's office for their investigation, and encouraging all homeowners to stay engaged with their HOAs and hold their leaders accountable. As I sat back down, neighbors I barely knew came over to shake my hand and share their own stories about problems they had experienced with the previous HOA leadership. It was clear that Patricia Whitmore's corruption had affected far more people than I had realized. Many people had just quietly accepted fines or fees, thinking they had no recourse. That night, driving home from the dinner, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past year. What had started as an infuriating phone call from my distressed daughter had turned into a legal battle, a criminal investigation, and ultimately a victory for justice and accountability. The $355 I had paid to get Emma's car out of impound had seemed like a lot of money at the time. But by refusing to accept the injustice, by standing up and fighting back, we had not only recovered that money but had won enough to pay for Emma's entire first year of college. More importantly, we had exposed a corrupt system and prevented Patricia Whitmore from victimizing more people. We had helped dozens of families get refunds they deserved. We had reformed an HOA that had been operating more like a petty dictatorship than a community organization. Emma graduated from Arizona State 4 years later with a degree in political science and immediately enrolled in law school. She's now in her second year at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, also at ASU, and she's focusing on consumer protection and housing law. She wants to help people fight against predatory practices by HOAs, landlords, and other entities that have power over where people live. I couldn't be more proud of her, and every time she talks about a case she's working on or a client she's helping, I think back to that day when her car was towed from the visitor spot in front of my house. That single act of petty tyranny by Patricia Whitmore set off a chain of events that not only brought justice, but also inspired my daughter to dedicate her career to helping others. As for Patricia Whitmore, she served 18 months of her 2-year sentence and was released on parole. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved out of state, trying to start over somewhere where people didn't know about her fraud conviction. I don't wish her ill, but I also don't feel sorry for her. She made her choices, and she faced the consequences. The Saguaro Hills community is a different place now. The HOA functions the way it's supposed to, maintaining common areas and enforcing reasonable rules without harassment or corruption. There's a new spirit of community engagement, with homeowners actually attending board meetings and asking questions about how their dues are being spent. I still live in my house on Desert Willow Court. Emma visits regularly, often bringing her law school textbooks and spreading them across my dining room table to study. Sometimes she asks me questions about the lawsuit, wanting to understand the legal strategies Rebecca used. I help as much as I can, though I'm no lawyer. Looking back, I realize that standing up to the HOA was one of the most important things I've ever done. Not because of the money, though that certainly helped Emma's education, but because it taught both of us that ordinary people can fight back against institutional abuse and win. It taught us that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult and time-consuming and stressful, is always worth it. The scratch on Emma's car bumper is still there, a small reminder of where this all started. She's refused to get it fixed, saying it's her battle scar, proof that she survived an encounter with a corrupt HOA and came out stronger on the other side. Every time I see that scratch, I smile. Because it reminds me that standing up for what's right, even in seemingly small matters, can have ripple effects far beyond what you might imagine. A towed car from a visitor parking spot led to exposing fraud, criminal charges, community reform, and inspiring my daughter's career path. You never know where standing up for justice might lead. So if you're ever in a situation where someone with authority is abusing their power, whether it's an HOA president, a landlord, a boss, or anyone else, I encourage you to fight back. Document everything, seek legal help if needed, and don't back down just because they expect you to. The system isn't perfect, but it can work if you're willing to persist. Emma and I talk sometimes about writing a book about our experience, a guide for homeowners dealing with abusive HOAs. Maybe someday we will. For now, she's focused on law school, and I'm focused on supporting her dreams and continuing to be an engaged member of my community. The visitor parking spots in front of my house are still there, of course. Emma parks in them whenever she visits, displaying her visitor pass properly. But now she knows, and I know, that if anyone ever tries to tow her car inappropriately again, we won't hesitate to fight back. Because we've done it before and we won. That's the real victory, I think. Not the settlement money, not the criminal conviction of Patricia Whitmore, not even the HOA reforms. The real victory is knowing that we have the strength and the knowledge to stand up for ourselves. That's a lesson worth far more than any tuition payment. As I write this, it's been almost 5 years since Emma's car was towed. She'll graduate from law school next year, and she's already had job offers from firms that specialize in consumer protection. I have no doubt she'll be an outstanding attorney, fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. And it all started because an overzealous HOA president towed a car from a visitor spot, thinking she could get away with it just like she had gotten away with so many other abuses of power. She picked the wrong car and the wrong family to mess with. We didn't just accept the injustice. We fought back and we won. That's my story. That's our story. And I hope it inspires others to stand up when they face similar situations. Because change doesn't happen when people stay silent. Change happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough and take action. The impound lot on McDowell Road is still in business, though I've heard they're much more careful about accepting towing requests from HOAs now. They know that homeowners might fight back, might have attorneys who will dig into the details, might expose corrupt arrangements. That's a good thing. Accountability benefits everyone. My neighbors sometimes joke that I'm the guy who took down the HOA president. I always correct them and say I didn't take her down. She took herself down by being corrupt. I just refuse to be another silent victim. There's an important distinction there. Harold Green served as HOA president for 2 years after Patricia's removal, then stepped down. A younger couple, the Johnsons, were elected to lead the board. They've continued the reforms and even expanded them. The community is thriving now in ways it never did under Patricia's authoritarian leadership. I've learned so much from this experience. I learned about HOA law, about civil litigation, about standing up to intimidation. But most importantly, I learned that justice is possible if you're willing to work for it. The system can seem overwhelming, especially when you're going up against an organization with resources and attorneys. But with the right lawyer, solid evidence, and persistence, David can defeat Goliath. Rebecca Chen and I still stay in touch. She's sent several other clients my way, people dealing with HOA disputes who want to hear about my experience. I'm always happy to share what I learned and to encourage people not to give up. Rebecca continues to win cases against abusive HOAs, and she's become something of a specialist in this area of law. The money from the settlement, beyond what went to Emma's tuition, I put into a savings account for her law school expenses. It's helping to reduce the amount she needs to borrow in student loans. In a very real way, Patricia Whitmore's corruption ended up funding Emma's legal education. There's a poetic justice in that. Emma often says that the HOA experience was a blessing in disguise. At the time, it was stressful and frustrating and seemed like just another obstacle. But it ended up shaping her career path and teaching her valuable lessons about justice and perseverance. She wouldn't be the person she is today without having gone through it. I sometimes wonder how many other Patricia Whitmores are out there, abusing their positions in HOAs and other organizations, thinking they'll never get caught. How many people are paying illegitimate fines or fees, thinking they have no choice? How much injustice goes unchallenged because people don't know their rights or don't think they can fight back? That's why I'm always willing to share our story. If it helps even one person stand up to an abusive HOA, if it prevents even one corrupt board member from victimizing homeowners, then all the time and stress was worth it. The final chapter of this story is still being written. Emma's legal career is just beginning. The HOA reforms in Saguaro Hills are still evolving. And somewhere out there, other homeowners are facing similar battles, hopefully inspired by stories like ours to fight back. As for me, I'm just a software engineer who refused to accept an injustice. I'm not a hero or a crusader. I'm just a dad who wanted to protect his daughter and who was willing to put in the work to make things right. If that's heroic, then I think we need to expand our definition of everyday heroism to include all the ordinary people who stand up to bullies and abusers in small ways every day. The visitor parking spot in front of my house represents something different to me now. It's not just a place to park. It's a reminder that small injustices matter, that standing up for what's right is always worth it, and that ordinary people have more power than they realize. If you ever drive through Scottsdale and happen to pass through the Saguaro Hills community, you'll see those visitor parking spots. They look like parking spots in any other community. But for Emma and me, they represent so much more. They represent justice, accountability, and the power of refusing to be a victim. That's the end of our story, or at least this chapter of it. Patricia Whitmore is in the past, serving her time and facing the consequences of her actions. Emma is building her future, preparing to help others fight similar battles. And I'm here, living my life, grateful for the lessons learned and the justice achieved. The settlement check that paid for Emma's first year of tuition sits framed in her apartment now, a reminder of where she came from and why she's studying law. It's made out for $19,214. To most people, it's just money. To us, it represents so much more. Every semester when Emma registers for classes, every time she buys a textbook or pays her tuition bill, she remembers where that money came from. It came from standing up to corruption. It came from refusing to accept injustice. It came from fighting back when it would have been easier to just pay the impound fees and move on. That's the legacy of this experience. Not the money, not the criminal conviction, not the HOA reforms. The real legacy is the lesson that ordinary people can fight against institutional abuse and win. That's a lesson Emma will carry with her throughout her legal career, and it's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. So that's my story about how the HOA towed my daughter's car from a visitor spot, and how we sued and won enough to pay for her first year of tuition. But it's also a story about so much more than that. It's a story about justice, about standing up to bullies, about the power of persistence, and about how a single act of petty tyranny can set off a chain of events that changes lives. If you take nothing else from this story, remember this: when you see injustice, don't look away. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Don't think you're powerless. Gather your evidence, find good legal help if you need it, and fight back. You might be surprised by what you can accomplish. And if you're ever dealing with an abusive HOA, know that you're not alone. There are attorneys who specialize in these cases. There are laws that protect homeowners. There are ways to fight back and win. Don't let anyone tell you that you have to just accept it, because those are the rules. Rules enforced corruptly or unjustly aren't worth following, and people who abuse their authority deserve to face consequences. That's what Emma's scratch bumper reminds us of every single day. Justice is possible. Change is achievable. And sometimes, standing up for what's right leads to victories beyond what you ever imagined.